Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for the TEDxEvansStreet Redux 2020. We all are aware of the coronavirus and its unexpected, broad, and rapidly emerging impact in countries across the world, the United States, South Carolina, and here in Florence. COVID-19 is profoundly reshaping American life as we know it. Though we were not able to gather publicly, we are gathering tonight right here, virtually. This event's theme is cogitation, the act of thinking deeply. When we think of TED or TEDx Talks, we can think of many subjects, ideas, points of view that have us thinking not only differently, but reflectively too. So tonight, we encourage you to let these thought leaders excite you to cogitate. I am Matthew Kistner, and I'll be your host. Our event will not be live or live streamed, so we encourage you to engage by using the chat box to share your thoughts on those talks that move you to your core. We want this experience to be as interactive as possible and just as enriching as if we are in a conference hall together. Think of it this way. We are in a room together sharing ideas, but just in the comforts of our own spaces. Before getting started, we would like to thank our sponsors, as they have supported TEDxEvansStreet events since our first event. Great community partners they are. You will hear talks that are our TEDxEvansStreet family's favorite. These talks made an impression on them and led them to cogitate. Think deeply. So let's get started with our first talk. Chosen by past TEDxEvansStreet speaker Jennifer Furlong is a talk from Celeste Headley, given at TEDx Creative Coast. This talk resonated with Jennifer because it is fun and engaging. Celeste's refreshing authenticity demonstrates everyone can learn more about improving their conversational competencies. Let's take a look.
Before this becomes a different kind of talk, I'm going to say that. All right, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them? It used to be that in order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either. So this world that we live in, this world in which every conversation has the potential to devolve into an argument where our politicians can't speak to one another and where even the most trivial of issues have someone fighting both passionately for it and against it, it's not normal. Pew Research did a study of 10,000 American adults, and they found that at this moment, we are more polarized, we are more divided than we ever have been in history. We're less likely to compromise, which means we're not listening to each other, and we make decisions about where to live, who to marry, and even who our friends are going to be based on what we already believe. Again, that means we're not listening to each other. A conversation requires a balance between talking and listening, and somewhere along the way, we lost that balance. Now, part of that is due to technology, the smartphones that you all either have in your hands or close enough that you could grab them really quickly. According to Pew Research, about a third of American teenagers send more than 100 texts a day. And many of them, almost most of them, are more likely to text their friends than they are to talk to them face to face. There's this great piece in The Atlantic. It was written by a high school teacher named Paul Barnwell. And he gave his kids a communication project. He wanted to teach them how to speak on a specific subject without using notes. And he said this: I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation? Now, I make my living talking to people. Nobel Prize winners, truck drivers, billionaires, kindergarten teachers, heads of state, plumbers. I talk to people that I like. I talk to people that I don't like. I talk to some people that I disagree with deeply on a personal level, but I still have a great conversation with them. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so teaching you how to talk and how to listen. Many of you have already heard a lot of advice on this. Things like look the person in the eye, think of interesting topics to discuss in advance, nod and smile to show that you're paying attention, repeat back what you just heard or summarize it. So I want you to forget all of that. It is crap. There is no reason to learn how to show you're paying attention if you are, in fact, paying attention. Now, I actually use the exact same skills as a professional interviewer that I do in regular life. So I'm going to teach you how to interview people, and that's actually going to help you learn how to be better conversationalists. Learn to have a conversation without wasting your time, without getting bored, and please God, without offending anybody. We've all had really great conversations. We've had them before. We know what it's like. The kind of conversation where you walk away feeling engaged and inspired, or where you feel like you've made a real connection, or you've been perfectly understood. There is no reason why most of your interactions can't be like that. So I have 10 basic rules. I'm going to walk you through all of them, but honestly, if you just choose one of them and master it, you're already going to enjoy better conversations. Number 1, don't multitask. And I don't mean just set down your cell phone or your tablet or your car keys or whatever's in your hand. I mean, be present. Be in that moment. Don't be thinking about your argument you had with your boss. Don't be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. If you want to get out of the conversation, get out of the conversation. But don't be half in it and half out of it. Number 2, don't pontificate. If you want to just state your opinion without any opportunity for response or argument or pushback or growth, write a blog. Now, there's a really good reason why I don't allow pundits on my show, because they're really boring. If they're a conservative, they're going to hate Obama and food stamps and abortion. If they're a liberal, they're going to hate big banks and oil corporations and Dick Cheney. Totally predictable. And you don't want to be like that. You need to enter every conversation assuming that you have something to learn. The famed therapist Eb Scott Peck said that true listening requires a setting aside of oneself. And sometimes that means setting aside your personal opinion. He said that sensing this acceptance, the speaker will become less and less vulnerable and more likely to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener. Again, assume that you have something to learn. Bill Nye, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. I put it this way: everybody is an expert in something. Number 3, use open-ended questions. In this case, take a cue from journalists. Start your questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. If you put in a complicated question, you're going to get a simple answer out. If I ask you, were you terrified? You're going to respond to the most powerful word in that sentence, which is terrified, and the answer is, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Were you angry? Yes, I was very angry. Let them describe it. They're the ones that know. Try asking them things like, what was that like? How did that feel? Because then they might have to stop for a moment and think about it, and you're going to get a much more interesting response. Number 4, go with the flow. That means thoughts will come into your mind, and you need to let them go out of your mind. We've heard interviews often in which a guest is talking for several minutes, and then the host comes back in and asks a question which seems like it comes out of nowhere, or it's already been answered. That means the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he thought of this really clever question, and he was just bound and determined to say that. And we do the exact same thing. We're sitting there having a conversation with someone, and then we remember that time that we met Hugh Jackman in a coffee shop. And we stop listening. We're just waiting for a moment to interject our story about Hugh Jackman and coffee. Stories and ideas are going to come to you. You need to let them come and let them go. Number 5, if you don't know, say that you don't know. Now, people on the radio, especially on NPR, are much more aware that they're going on the record. And so they're more careful about what they claim to be an expert in and what they claim to know for sure. Do that. Err on the side of caution. Talk should not be cheap. Number 6, don't equate your experience with theirs. If they're talking about having lost a family member, don't start talking about the time that you lost a family member. If they're talking about the trouble that they're having at work, don't tell them about how much you hate your job. It's not the same. It is never the same. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, it is not about you. You don't need to take that moment to prove how amazing you are or how much you've suffered. Somebody asked Stephen Hawking once what his IQ was, and he says, I have no idea. People who brag about their IQs are losers. Conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Number seven, try not to repeat yourself. It's condescending and it's really boring. And we tend to do it a lot, especially in work conversations or in conversations with our kids. We have a point to make, so we just keep rephrasing it over and over. Don't do that. Number 8, stay out of the weeds. Frankly, people don't care about the years, the names, the dates, all those details that you're struggling to come up with in your mind. They don't care. What they care about is you. They care about what you're like, what you have in common. So forget the details. Leave them out. Number 9, this is not the last one, but it is the most important one. Listen. I cannot tell you how many really important people have said that listening is perhaps the number one most important skill that you could develop. Buddha said, and I'm paraphrasing, if your mouth is open, you're not learning. And Calvin Coolidge said, no man ever listened his way out of a job. Why do we not listen to each other? Number 1, we'd rather talk. When I'm talking, I'm in control. I don't have to hear anything I'm not interested in. I'm the center of attention. I can bolster my own identity. But there's another reason. We get distracted. The average person talks at about 225 words per minute, but we can listen at up to 500 words per minute. So our minds are filling in those other 275 words. And look, I know it takes effort and energy to actually pay attention to someone. But if you can't do that, you're not in a conversation. You're just two people shouting out barely related sentences in the same place. You have to listen to one another. Stephen Covey said it very beautifully. He said, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. One more rule, and number 10, and it's this one. Be brief. All of this boils down to the same basic concept, and it is this one. Be interested in other people. You know, I grew up with a very famous grandfather, and there was kind of a ritual in my home. People would come over to talk to my grandparents, and after they would leave, my mother would come over to us and she'd say, do you know who that was? She was the runner-up to Miss America. He was the mayor of Sacramento. She won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a Russian ballet dancer. And I kind of grew up assuming everyone has some hidden amazing thing about them. And honestly, I think it's what makes me a better host. I keep my mouth shut as often as I possibly can. I keep my mind open, and I'm always prepared to be amazed, and I'm never disappointed. You do the same thing. Go out, talk to people, listen to people, and most importantly, be prepared to be amazed. Thanks.
In my conversations, I will definitely prepare to be amazed as I actively listen. What about you? Next up, we have volunteer Alicia Barksdale's favorite talk by Nora McInerney, given at TEDx Women. What Alicia loves about this talk is it's an absolutely stunning and hilarious talk about how we should really approach grief.
So 2014 was a big year for me. Do you ever have that? Just like a big year, like a banner year. For me, it went like this. October 3rd, I lost my second pregnancy. And then October 8th, my dad died of cancer. And then on November 25th, my husband Aaron died after 3 years with stage 4 glioblastoma, which is just a fancy word for brain cancer. So I'm fun. People love to invite me out all the time. Packed social life. Usually when I talk about this period of my life, the reaction I get is essentially, I can't imagine. But I do think you can. I think you can. And I think that you should, because someday it's going to happen to you. Maybe not these specific losses in this specific order or at this speed, but like I said, I'm very fun, and the research that I have seen will stun you. Everyone you love has a 100% chance of dying. And that's why you came to TED. So since all of this loss happened, I've made it a career to talk about death and loss, not just my own, because it's pretty easy to recap, but the losses and tragedies that other people have experienced. It's a niche, I have to say. It's a small niche, and I wish I made more money, but I've written some very uplifting books, host a very uplifting podcast. I started a little nonprofit. I'm just trying to do what I can to make more people comfortable with the uncomfortable, and grief is so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable, especially if it's someone else's grief. So a part of that work is this group that I started with my friend Mo, who is also a widow. We call it the Hot Young Widows Club. And it's real. We have membership cards and t-shirts. And when your person dies, your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, literally don't care if you were married, your friends and your family are just going to sort of look around through friends of friends of friends of friends until they find someone who's gone through something similar, and then they'll push you towards each other so you can talk amongst yourselves and not get your sad on other people. So that's what we do. It's just a series of small groups where men, women, gay, straight, married, partnered can talk about their dead person and say the things that the other people in their lives aren't ready or willing to hear yet. Huge range of conversations. Like, my husband died 2 weeks ago. I can't stop thinking about sex. Is that normal? Yeah. What if it's one of the Property Brothers? Less normal, but I'll accept it. Things like, look, when I'm out in public and I see old people holding hands, like couples who have clearly been together for decades, and then I look at them and I imagine like all of the things they've been through together, the good things, the bad things, the arguments they've had over who should take out the trash. I just find my heart filled with rage. And that example is personal to me. Most of the conversations that we have in the group can and will just stay amongst ourselves, but there are things that we talk about that the rest of the world that is grief adjacent but not yet grief stricken, could really benefit from hearing. And if you can't tell, I'm only interested in / capable of unscientific studies. So what I did was go to the Hot Young Widows Club and say, hello, friends, remember when your person died? They did. Do you remember all the things people said to you? Oh, yeah. Which ones did you hate the most? There were a lot of comments, a lot of answers. People say a lot of things, but 2 rose to the top pretty quickly. Moving on. Now, since 2014, I will tell you I have remarried a very handsome man named Matthew. We have 4 children in our blended family. We live in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. We have a rescue dog. I drive a minivan, like the kind where doors open, I don't even touch them. Like by any measure, life is good. I've also never said measure. I've never once said it that way. I don't know where that came from. I've never heard anyone else say it that way, but it looks like it should be said that way, and that's why the English language is trash. So impressed with anyone who speaks it in addition to a language that makes sense. So good job. But by any measure, life is really, really good, but I haven't moved on. And I hate that phrase so much, and I understand why other people do, because what it says is that Aaron's life and death and love are just moments that I can leave behind me, and that I probably should. And when I talk about Aaron, I slip so easily into the present tense, and I've always thought that made me weird. And then I noticed that everybody does it. And it's not because we are in denial or because we're forgetful. It's because the people we love, who we've lost, are still so present for us. So when I say, oh, Aaron is, it's because Aaron still is. And it's not in the way that he was before, which was much better, and it's not in the way that churchy people tried to tell me that he would be. It's just that he's indelible, and so he's present for me. Here, he's present for me in the work that I do, in the child that we had together, in these 3 other children I'm raising who never met him, who shared none of his DNA, but who are only in my life because I had Aaron and because I lost Aaron. He's present in my marriage to Matthew because Aaron's life and love and death made me the person that Matthew wanted to marry. So I've not moved on from Aaron, I've moved forward with him. We spread Aaron's ashes in his favorite river in Minnesota, and when the bag was empty, because when you're cremated, you fit into a plastic bag, there were still ashes stuck to my fingers, and I could have just put my hands in the water and rinsed them, but instead, I licked my hands clean because I was so afraid of losing more than I had already lost, and I was so desperate to make sure that he would always be a part of me. But of course he would be, because when you watch your person fill himself with poison for 3 years just so he can stay alive a little bit longer with you, that stays with you. When you watch him fade from the healthy person he was the night you met to nothing, that stays with you. When you watch your son, who isn't even 2 years old yet, walk up to his father's bed on the last day of his life like he knows what's coming in a few hours and say, I love you, all done, bye-bye. That stays with you. Just like when you fall in love, finally, like really fall in love with someone who gets you and sees you, and you even see, oh my God, I've been wrong this entire time. Love is not a contest or a reality show. It's so quiet. It's this invisible thread of calm that connects the two of us, even when everything is chaos, when things are falling apart, even when he's gone. That stays with you. We used to do this thing because my hands are always freezing and he's so warm, where I would take my ice cold hands and shove them up his shirt, press them against his hot bod. And he hated it so much, but he loved me. And after he died, I laid in bed with Aaron and I put my hands underneath him and I felt his warmth. And I can't even tell you if my hands were cold, but I can tell you that I knew it was the last time I would ever do that. And that memory is always going to be sad. That memory will always hurt, even when I'm 600 years old and I'm just a hologram. Just like the memory of meeting him is always going to make me laugh. Grief doesn't happen in this vacuum. It happens alongside of and mixed in with all of these other emotions. So I met Matthew, my current husband, who doesn't love that title. But it's so accurate. I met Matthew, and there was this audible sigh of relief among the people who love me, like, it's over. She did it. She got a happy ending. We can all go home. And we did good. And that narrative is so appealing even to me. And I thought maybe I'd gotten that too, but I didn't. I got another chapter. And it's such a good chapter. I love you, honey. It's such a good chapter. But especially at the beginning, it was like an alternate universe or one of those old choose your own adventure books from the 80s where there are two parallel plot lines. So I opened my heart to Matthew and my brain was like, would you like to think about Aaron? Like the past, the present, future, like just get in there. And I did. And all of a sudden, those two plots were unfurling at once, and falling in love with Matthew really helped me realize the enormity of what I lost when Aaron died. And just as importantly, it helped me realize that my love for Aaron and my grief for Aaron and my love for Matthew are not opposing forces. They're just strands to the same thread. They're the same stuff. What would my parents say? I'm not special. They had 4 kids. They were like, frankly. But I'm not special. I know that. I am fully aware that all day, every day, all around the world, terrible things are happening. All the time. Like I said, fun person. But like terrible things are happening. People are experiencing deeply formative and traumatic losses every day. And as part of my job, this weird podcast that I have, I sometimes talk to people about the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And sometimes that's the loss of someone they love, sometimes days ago or weeks ago, years ago, even decades ago. And these people that I interview, they haven't closed themselves around this loss and made it the center of their lives. They've lived, their worlds have kept spinning. But they're talking to me, a total stranger, about the person they love who has died, because these are the experiences that mark us and make us just as much as the joyful ones, and just as permanently. Long after you get your last sympathy card or your last hot dish. Like, we don't look at the people around us experiencing life's joys and wonders and tell them to move on, do we? We don't like send a card that's like, congratulations on your beautiful baby. And then 5 years later think like, another birthday party? Get over it. Like, yeah, we get it. He's 5. Wow. But grief is kind of one of those things like falling in love or having a baby or watching The Wire on HBO, where you don't get it until you get it, until you do it. And once you do it, once it's your love or your baby, once it's your grief and your front row at the funeral, you get it. You understand what you're experiencing is not a moment in time. It's not a bone that will reset, but that you've been touched by something chronic, something incurable. It's not fatal, but sometimes grief feels like it could be. And if we can't prevent it in one another, what can we do? What can we do other than try to remind one another that some things can't be fixed, and not all wounds are meant to heal? We need each other to remember, to help each other remember that grief is this multitasking emotion, that you can and will be sad and happy, you'll be grieving and able to love in the same year or week, the same breath. We need to remember that a grieving person is going to laugh again and smile again. If they're lucky, they'll even find love again. That yes, absolutely, they're going to move forward. But that doesn't mean that they've moved on. Thank you.
Totally agree. We shouldn't look at our departed loved ones as something to forget about and overcome, but to move forward within us. Our next talk is a favorite of Bernadette Ross, who has beautifully curated all of our TEDxEvansStreet events. This talk and performance at a TED conference is by Judith Jameson and the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. Bernadette says it's a reflection of her historical past, shaped as a celebration of a people, their greatness, and their passion to one day be free.
In the water, And now let's give a warm welcome to the Artistic Director Emerita of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theatre, Judith Jamison.
Thanks. How are y'all? Yeah, you know you just been to church. You just saw a baptism. Yes? This is from this wonderful piece Mr. Ailey created in 1960 called Revelations. Mr. Ailey was 29 years old when he choreographed this masterpiece. It's been danced all over the world and understood universally because he understood the humanity in us all. Revelations is a reflection of a journey we all take in life, and hopefully triumphantly. That was the magic of Alvin Ailey. He was able to see you in the audience, see me as the dancer, and see the connection between us, and choreograph works that connected us all. So you felt he was telling your story while I felt I was dancing mine. I started dancing when I was 6 years old in Philadelphia. I was skinny, dark chocolate, and a kid with legs up to my armpits. And the very first performance I had at the Judimar School of Dance was in a red checkered shirt, dungarees, pink ballet shoes, and we were dancing to I'm an Old Cowhand from the Rio Grande. I loved every minute of it. I mean, I literally did love every minute of it, especially when I heard the applause. And I knew right there when I was 6, I said, that's for me. At 6, you're not thinking that's going to be a career of your lifetime, but that was perfect for that moment. I danced my way through school and through college, and it still didn't dawn on me that that's what I actually wanted to do. I went to an audition, which I was dreadful in. It's the only audition I've had in my life. And when I was let go from that audition, because I thought when they were saying thank you very much, that meant for me to stay. I ran up the steps, and there was a man sitting on the steps. And I barely noticed him. He was an observer. 3 days later, that man called me and asked me would I like to join the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theatre. That's how it happened, folks. That's it. There's no drama or trauma. So I spent 15 years dancing with the company, and then I directed it for something like 21 years. If you were Black and African American and a dancer any time between the 40s and the 70s, you had much to say because your complete voice was not being heard, and you were not being represented as you truly were. Alvin Ailey had the courage, right in the middle of the civil rights movement, to present the truth about who we were, that our creativity, our beauty, our intelligence, our talents were an intrinsic part of the panoply of American culture. Our mantra has always been to educate, to entertain, and to lift our audiences. Mr. Ailey believed that dance came from the people and needed to be delivered back to the people. We didn't dance in a vacuum. It was our mission to serve people. We call it outreach now, but it's always been a part of who we were and still are 60 years later to this day, being inclusive of our audiences. It's always been an important part of the company. We ask ourselves, who are we dancing for? Why are we dancing, if not to show people what it is to be human and to connect with the audiences that we dance for. We've always felt responsible to make sure the community understood that what we do is a part of their heritage. We just don't do this also in America, we do it all over the world. We tour more than any other dance company in the world. After Nelson Mandela was released from prison, I thought, well, this is the time to go to South Africa. And that was some outreach. We went to Johannesburg, Soweto, and some other townships that were really in dire straits. And it dawned on me as we were there, I'm going like, here we are in the seat of Mother Africa, and we're trying to teach these people how to dance? But it was our African Americanness that they were interested in, and the culture that we have developed over the last 400 years. We toured all over the world many times, and whether we're in Europe or South America or Asia or somewhere else, audiences are thrilled and excited. You sounded thrilled and excited. Sometimes with tears in their eyes, because this nonverbal communication really works. And it's about embracing everyone. Alvin didn't need to explain to us what was going on at the time in the 60s and 70s. It was obvious why we were doing his work. He knew what the truth of the time was about, and he was unafraid to reveal it through dance. He tapped into every emotion he had and we had, and from angerness to happiness to grief and everything in between, he knew us. He took our history and turned it into powerful dance. He and I overlapped generationally. We didn't have to talk about things so much because we understood implicitly our shared responsibilities. So when he asked me to take over the company before he passed in 1989, I felt prepared to carry it forward. Alvin and I were like parts of the same tree. He, the roots and the trunk, and we were the branches. I was his muse. We were all his muses. The ballet Cry, which some of you might have seen, you're going to see an excerpt of it. It was made on me, and Alvin dedicated it to all Black women, especially our mothers. When Alvin and I went in the studio, of course he wasn't thinking, here I am creating an iconic work. Do you know any artist that does that? You don't go into the studio to create anything but what's coming truthfully from your heart and your spirit, and you trust that you have a dancer you can share that with. Rehearsal space is a sacred space, not to be intruded upon, because it's about talking to each other through spirit. You better have some technique on top of that so you can do the dance. He brought his Alvin to Cry, and I brought my Judy to it. I just did the steps, and this was a birthday present for his mother because he couldn't afford to get her a tactile gift. When I performed it the first time, it was physically and emotionally draining. I hadn't yet run through the whole piece from beginning to end. The ballet is 16 minutes long. It's about a proud woman who has been to hell and back from her journey across the Atlantic. She's exhausted. She's a queen. And in this section you're going to see, she is triumphant. She made it, and she is, in that last step that she does, beating away anything negative with her tremendous strength. And in the last step, she digs into the earth, and she reaches into the sky, because she's clearing space for the next journey. I performed it in 1971, and we are still clearing space. Now let me leave you with one last thought. Here we are in the 21st century, still fighting for civil rights. Not a day goes by that we are not made aware of the struggle that continues. I believe that dance can elevate our human experience beyond words. And when you're sitting in the dark, in the theater, having a personal experience, you don't feel blocked or misunderstood. You feel open, alive, and we hope inspired. Thank you.
High flying bird, fly on. I want the clouds over my head, over my head, over my head. I don't want no snowboard day, yeah. Snowboard day, snowboard day. I'm gonna live until I'm dead, till I'm dead, till I'm dead. Mother, 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 save your child. Mother, 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 save your child. Lord, Lord, where will I be tomorrow night? Yeah. Then we're going right on, be free. Going right on, let me be free. Right on, let me be free. Right on, let me be free.
What a performance! We are enjoying your comments in the chat. Keep them coming. Sharing your deep thoughts on the talks and the performance so far has opened the mind of other attendees. You have officially shared an idea worth spreading. Let's give a special thanks to our sponsors again. Let's keep it going with a favorite from TEDxEvansStreet alum, Dr. Lucia Wong. Her choice comes from Kyle McDonald, presented at TEDx Vienna. This is her favorite. Simply taking action with something small may lead to unexpected surprises. Take a look.
My name is Kyle. I'm the red paperclip guy. But before I get started on that story, I want to draw attention to this slide behind me. On the beginning of every TED video out there, the whatever it's called, the screenshot that precedes the video. Everyone's standing like this. All of them. So we would demand more from TED. Post comments online, poking fun at this. We need better screenshots for these videos. We can make a better world of TED with better screenshots. Onto the paperclip, though. This is this kind of crazy idea I had when I was, about 10 years ago. I was looking down at my desk, and I saw a red paperclip sitting there. And I said, you know what? I remember this game called Bigger and Better, where you start with something small, and you trade it for something bigger, and then you repeat. I wonder what would happen if I took this red paperclip and tried to trade it. So I posted a picture of that red paperclip on a website called Craigslist, and 2 girls named Ronnie and Karina responded and said, hey, that's pretty cool. We'd like to trade with you. We got a pen shaped like a fish. I was really excited. This was a cool pen. This was bigger and better than a red paperclip. How far can I go with this idea? Anybody want a pen shaped like a fish? Absolutely. My name's Annie, and I've got a doorknob with a crazy face on it. 2 trades in, I've already gone way up from a paperclip, and I was thinking, how far can I go with this? Maybe I could keep going until, one day owned a house or something from this. Sean says, come down to my place. I'll cook you burgers, and I'll trade you my camping stove for that doorknob, because I need it to fix the knob on my stovetop espresso maker. We're moving assets and moving liabilities into assets. We're creating value. We're improving each other's lives, albeit on a small scale. But to Sergeant David J. of the U.S. Marine Corps, he said, I've been looking for that exact model of camping stove, and I've got extra generators. Would you like an electric generator? And to me, this was a dream come true, an electric generator. Finally, my teenage dreams of being able to create power were realized. And unfortunately, most people on the internet didn't suffer from a blackout. They didn't need power. So my trading for bigger and better things that I thought had value turned into a liability. And it took me several weeks to be able to trade this, but I actually found another person just recently out of his teenage years who did want to create power with this generator. And his name is Martin, and he was in New York City, and he says, look, I've got an empty beer keg. I'll trade you an IOU to fill the keg with beer and a neon Budweiser sign. And what do you say? So I met up with him, we made the trade, and here's us showing that all parts of the trade work. I rebranded the mishmash of IOU beer keg and neon Budweiser sign and called it an instant party. Does anybody out there want a party? My name is Michel Barrette. I'm a famous radio and TV personality in the province of Quebec, and I want to make a trade with you. Absolutely, Michel, what do you have to trade? I'll trade you my worst snowmobile. I was intrigued just by the idea of somebody's worst snowmobile. It implied that he had not only had more than one snowmobile, but he was kind of cheeky and willing to prove to me that, I've got better ones, but I'll trade you my worst. I was really happy to trade with him. He was a great guy, and it was a pretty nice snowmobile. Seeing how it was the middle of winter in Canada, and it was very cold, and it was the kind of thing where a snowmobile at that time of year had more value than in the summer, a snowmobile magazine called Snow Riders West called me up and said, hey, we would like to offer you 2 trips for 2 to the Canadian Rockies in exchange for that snowmobile. It'll probably give our magazine some publicity, and who doesn't want to go to the Rockies at this time of year? I said yes, and I said, all right, what's the catch? And they said, the catch is you can come to the Rockies, but you can't come to the town of Yak in British Columbia. And I said, all right, well, I got to find a loophole around this. So we decided to kind of blackmail a national news organization. It's a really long story, but what ended up happening was I got on TV wearing the logo for the shirt I was wearing. It was called Cintas, the uniform company. And it was just sort of an inside joke. My cousin's husband had given me this shirt. An even longer story to explain the whole thing. However, the head honcho of that company saw me on TV with his corporate uniform on and said, wait a second, this is a huge liability to me, but it's also an opportunity. And we met up one night, and he says, I'd like to make you a trade. What do you say? And I think that's the perfect way we can work together without selling our souls to the corporate ownership devil. And he said, great, let's meet up. So we met up. He offered to trade this van for the trip for 2 to the Rockies. I drove the van to the Rockies. He flew, because the trip included that. And I wound up with this giant, huge machine, much bigger than a paperclip, arguably better, worse fuel mileage, but could transport a lot better things than just that. So I said, does anybody out there want to trade? And I realized bigger and better was just really getting bigger. But how could it get better? What was the opportunity here? And I realized that I'd been offered a recording contract, a piece of paper, a promise, an opportunity to someone who was good at music. Does anybody want to be a recording artist? So I traded the van for the recording contract with Brendan. He used it to drive around in his band, which was currently traveling around in 1988 Volkswagen Jetta. Moving up to the van really helped him out. I took the recording contract. Does anybody want to be a recording artist? And it turns out pretty much everyone in the world wants to record music. I was offered my soul from a soul singer, a pinky finger. Someone actually offered me their virginity, which is... I don't know what the legalities are. Needless to say, I said no because Jody said to me, look, I've got half a duplex in Phoenix, Arizona. Half of it's unrented. I'd like to trade you a year of free rent in my duplex for that. What do you say? I said yes. I went down there. We made the trade in front of the white picket fence, very Americana. And now I had a year of free rent. Her next door, it was one of her tenants, actually. Her next door neighbor, Leslie, found out about this, and she says, I want that free rent. So she offered me up an afternoon with her boss. And at first, I was kind of like, this sort of sucks. Because I didn't know who her boss was. And then she stood up, I'll bring him out. And then I'm like, whoa, this is kind of weird. She brings out her boss's head. Her boss was Alice Cooper, because she worked at Alice Cooperstown in Phoenix as the manager of the restaurant. So I was like, an afternoon with Alice Cooper, that's pretty amazing. What's it going to be worth? His tour manager called me up and says, we're on tour in Fargo, North Dakota. Why don't you come up, experience an afternoon with Alice Cooper, and see what it's like? And then after our afternoon, this happened live on stage. Alice is a really nice guy. This picture displays how nice he is. Look, it's great you're doing this. You're going to find an Italian billionaire who's a big Alice Cooper fan. He'll probably have several mansions. He'd easily trade you one of them. Can you promise me one thing? What's that? Can you promise you won't trade an afternoon with me for a weekend with the Rolling Stones or a night with Kiss? I said, all right, I'll try. And the phone rang, and it was Mark. Mark says, I'm an amateur photographer, and I've got a lot of Kiss memorabilia. Would you be interested in any of that? I was like, oh, man, this is hard, because I really want to trade with this guy, but what do you have? And he says, well, I got this, I got that, I got Kiss posters, I got Kiss guitars, I got a Kiss snow globe. When he said Kiss snow globe, I immediately said yes, and only the snow globe. So I went up, met up with Mark, traded the afternoon with Alice Cooper, a priceless opportunity for a Kiss snow globe. And the whole world kind of sort of was like, ooh. And I was like, this is great. It lights up, changes colors. Here's some of the various online responses from the video. This is the worst trade that I've ever heard of, bar none. This is possibly the dumbest decision I've ever seen anyone make, ever. Except for the people on Jerry Springer. Other people were much more eloquent in their delivery. And this was the only time during the entire project where I had another trade lined up. Every other trade had come along serendipitously, and it had just been this amazing experience. However, 2 months previous to all this guy had called me up and said, hey, my name's Corbin Burnson. I'm a huge Hollywood actor. I'm making a movie. And I would like to offer a paid speaking credited role in a Hollywood film. Would you be interested in trading for that? I had just done the recording contract trade, and I was like, yes, absolutely, this sounds perfect. He hung up the phone, and I'm like, Corbin Burnson, who is this guy? Turns out he is very well known. He's been in many major movies, and he also, according to Wikipedia, has the world's largest snow globe collection, over 6,500 snow globes. Since it was Wikipedia, I knew it was true. And I just sort of kept it in the back of my head. And when Mark said he had a Kiss snow globe, I was like, oh, this is perfect. Called Corbin. Corbin, do you want the Kiss snow globe? He's like, send me a picture. I sent him a picture. Corbin called back. Not only do I want it, I need it. And while these comments were coming in, like dumbass, etc., I had no backup plan. And luckily for the project and for Corbin, he didn't get hit by a bus, and he was still alive. And we made a trade, and he showed us into his snow globe lair of over 6,000 snow globes, which looks kind of like this. Following this, the economic development officer of the town of Kipling, Saskatchewan, a fellow named Bert Roach, called me up and said, we see that you've been doing this project. Our town has a couple extra houses that we own. Would there be a potential that maybe we could trade one of these houses for something you have. And I said, well, right now I have a role in the movie. He's like, oh, that'd be perfect. What we were thinking is having a huge housewarming party, a huge celebration, inviting everyone in the world to come to Kipling, and we could offer an opportunity. We'll call it Kipling Idol, and we'll have live auditions for the movie role here, right in town. And I said, that's absolutely perfect, Bert. What do you need to do to make this happen? He's like, well, we need town council approval. And I said, all right, well, if you can get it, that'd be great. He called me back 2 weeks later, and he's like, I did it. I got town council approval. We can make the trade. Turns out town council approval was getting 2 people to put their hand in the air. But full credit to Bert, he made it happen. And we traveled to Kipling, and there we are. That's how you trade a paperclip for a house. And that's the house. The best part about this whole project, though, is fun making the trades for things. It's easier to tell the story with the objects, but it was the people behind it. And in Kipling, apparently they have Mounties that sign the deeds to house when you make the trade. We had a huge housewarming party. Over 3,500 people came to the town of Kipling. It's a town of under 1,000 people for an entire weekend. There was live auditions on stage, 500-600 people in the crowd, including the volunteer fire department, in a capacity 300-person building. So they let it slide, but it was an amazing, amazing experience. Corbin Burnson went out on stage the next day in town and said, here's the winner of the movie role. And written on his back was the name Nolan Hubbard. Nolan Hubbard had just graduated from high school, was making minimum wage at the Bottle Depot, and 2 months after this picture was taken, he was down in Los Angeles working on a film with Corbin, an amazingly talented person who, without this opportunity to make the film, might have not had that chance. And it was all about the people saying, yes, let's build something, let's do something together, let's collaborate, let's see what happens. That was what One Red Paperclip was all about. And there, at this housewarming party in Kipling, Saskatchewan, Karina had the original red paperclip around her neck in a picture frame. And people were saying to me, like, wow, you traded away the paperclip, but don't you wish you had it back now? That's got to be worth a lot of money. It's really famous. And I said to them that day what I still say today. It wasn't about the paperclip. It's not about having it or selling it or what it's worth. If I hadn't traded away that red paperclip, I'd just be a guy sitting there at his desk holding a paperclip in his hand, wondering what would happen if I did something with the paperclip. So if you have a paperclip, trade it away. You might only get a fish pan, but it might be the single step that leads to an amazing journey. And for me, that journey will be off this red circle. So I wish you the best.
When you think of something ingenious, no matter how small, move on it. You never know the opportunities it may bring. Keeping it going. Tanita Perry, licensee/organizer of TEDxEvansStreet, favorite talk is from Melody Hobson, given at a TED event. She loves this talk because it speaks to why we collectively want the same things in life, embrace our differences. Here it is.
So it's 2006. My friend Harold Ford calls me. He's running for U.S. Senate in Tennessee. And he says, Melody, I desperately need some national press. Do you have any ideas? So I had an idea. I called a friend who was in New York at one of the most successful media companies in the world. And she said, why don't we host an editorial board lunch for Harold? You come with him. Harold and I arrive in New York. We are in our best suits. We look like shiny new pennies. And we get to the receptionist and we say, we're here for the lunch. She motions for us to follow her. We walk through a series of corridors, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a stark room, at which point she looks at us and she says, where are your uniforms? Just as this happens, my friend rushes in. The blood drains from her face. There are literally no words, right? And I look at her and I say, now, don't you think we need more than one black person in the US Senate? Now, Harold and I, we still laugh about that story. And in many ways, the moment caught me off guard. But deep, deep down inside, I actually wasn't surprised. And I wasn't surprised because of something my mother taught me about 30 years before. You see, my mother was ruthlessly realistic. I remember one day coming home from a birthday party where I was the only black kid invited. And instead of asking me the normal motherly questions like, did you have fun or how was the cake? My mother looked at me and she said, how did they treat you? I was 7. I did not understand. I mean, why would anyone treat me differently? But she knew. And she looked me right in the eye and she said, they will not always treat you well. Now, race is one of those topics in America that makes people extraordinarily uncomfortable. You bring it up at a dinner party or in a workplace environment, it is literally the conversational equivalent of touching the third rail. There is shock, followed by a long silence. And even coming here today, I told some friends and colleagues that I planned to talk about race, and they warned me. They told me, don't do it. There'd be huge risks in me talking about this topic, that people might think I'm a militant black woman and I would ruin my career. And I have to tell you, I actually for a moment was a bit afraid. Then I realized the first step to solving any problem is to not hide from it. And the first step to any form of action is awareness. And so I decided to actually talk about race. And I decided that if I came here and shared with you some of my experiences, then maybe we could all be a little less anxious and a little more bold in our conversations about race. Now, I know there are people out there who will say that the election of Barack Obama meant that it was the end of racial discrimination for all eternity, right? But I work in the investment business, and we have a saying, the numbers do not lie. And here, there are significant, quantifiable racial disparities that cannot be ignored in household wealth, household income, job opportunities, healthcare. One example from corporate America. Even though white men make up just 30% of the US population, they hold 70% of all corporate board seats. Of this Fortune 250, there are only 7 CEOs that are minorities. And of the thousands of publicly traded companies today, thousands, only 2 are chaired by black women. And you're looking at one of them, the same one who not too long ago was nearly mistaken for kitchen help. So that is a fact. Now, I have this thought experience that I play with myself, experiment, when I say, imagine if I walked you into a room and it was of a major corporation like ExxonMobil, and every single person around the boardroom were black, you would think that were weird. But if I walked you into a Fortune 500 company and every around the table is a white male, when will it be that we think that's weird too? And I know how we got here. I know how we got here. You know, there was institutionalized and one time legalized discrimination in our country. There's no question about it. But I still, as I sort of grapple with this issue, my mother's question hangs in the air for me. How did they treat you? No, I do not raise this issue to complain or in any way elicit any kind of sympathy. I have succeeded in my life beyond my wildest expectations. And I've been treated well by people of all races more often than I have not. I tell the uniform story because it happened. I cite those statistics around corporate board diversity because they are real. And I stand here today talking about this issue of racial discrimination because I believe it threatens to rob another generation of all the opportunities that all of us want for all of our children, no matter what their color or where they come from. And I think it also threatens to hold back businesses. You see, researchers have coined this term color blindness to describe a learned behavior where we pretend that we don't notice race. If you happen to be surrounded by a bunch of people who look like you, that's purely accidental. Now, color blindness, in my view, doesn't mean that there's no racial discrimination and there's fairness. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't ensure it. In my view, color blindness is very dangerous because it means we're ignoring the problem. There was a corporate study that said that instead of avoiding race, the really smart corporations actually deal with it head on. They actually recognize that embracing diversity means recognizing all races, including the majority one. But I'll be the first one to tell you, this subject matter can be hard, awkward, uncomfortable, but that's kind of the point. In the spirit of debunking racial stereotypes, the one that black people don't like to swim, I'm going to tell you how much I love to swim. I love to swim so much that as an adult, I swim with a coach. And one day my coach had me do a drill where I had to swim to one end of a 25-meter pool without taking a breath. And every single time I failed, I had to start over. And I failed a lot. By the end, I got it, but I got out of the pool, I was exasperated and tired and annoyed. And I said, why are we doing breath-holding exercises? And my coach looked at me and he said, Melody, that was not a breath-holding exercise. That drill was to make you comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's how most of us spend our days. If we can learn to deal with our discomfort and just relax into it, we'll have a better life. So I think it's time for us to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversation about race. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, male, female, all of us. If we truly believe in equal rights and equal opportunity in America, I think we have to have real conversations about this issue. We cannot afford to be colorblind. We have to be color brave. We have to be willing, as teachers and parents and entrepreneurs and scientists, we have to be willing to have proactive conversations about race with honesty and understanding and courage. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. Because our businesses and our products and our science, our research, all of that will be better with greater diversity. Now, my favorite example of color bravery is a guy named John Skipper. He runs ESPN. He's a North Carolina native, quintessential Southern gentleman, white. He joined ESPN, which already had a culture of inclusion and diversity, but he took it up a notch. He demanded that every open position have a diverse slate of candidates. Now, he says the senior people in the beginning bristled, and they would come to him and say, do you want me to hire the minority, or do you want me to hire the best person for the job? And Skipper says his answers were always the same, yes. And by saying yes to diversity, I honestly believe that ESPN is the most valuable cable franchise in the world. I think that's a part of the secret sauce. Now, I can tell you in my own industry, at Ariel Investments, we actually view our diversity as a competitive advantage. And that advantage can extend way beyond business. There's a guy named Scott Page at the University of Michigan. He's the first person to develop a mathematical calculation for diversity. He says if you're trying to solve a really hard problem, really hard, that you should have a diverse group of people, including those with diverse intellects. The example that he gives is the smallpox epidemic. When it was ravaging Europe, they brought together all these scientists and they were stumped. And the beginnings of the cure to the disease came from the most unlikely source, a dairy farmer. A dairy farmer who noticed that the milkmaids were not getting smallpox. And the smallpox vaccination is bovine-based because of that dairy farmer. Now, I'm sure you're sitting here and you're saying, I don't run a cable company, I don't run an investment firm, I am not a dairy farmer, what can I do? And I'm telling you, you can be color brave. If you're a part of a hiring process or an admissions process, you can be color brave. If you are trying to solve a really hard problem, you can speak up and be color brave. Now, I know people will say, but that doesn't add up to a lot. But I'm actually asking you to do something really simple. Observe your environment. At work, at school, at home. I'm asking you to look at the people around you purposefully and intentionally. Invite people into your life who don't look like you, don't think like you, don't act like you, don't come from where you come from. And you might find that they will challenge your assumptions and make you grow as a person. You might get powerful new insights from these individuals. Or, like my husband, who happens to be white, you might learn that black people, men, women, children, we use body lotion every single day. Now, I also think that this is very important so that the next generation really understands that this progress will help them because they're expecting us to be great role models. Now, I told you my mother, she was ruthlessly realistic. She was an unbelievable role model. She was the kind of person who got to be the way she was because she was a single mom with 6 kids in Chicago. She was in the real estate business where she worked extraordinarily hard, but oftentimes had a hard time making ends meet. And that meant sometimes we got our phone disconnected or our lights turned off or we got evicted. And we got evicted. Sometimes we lived in these small apartments that she owned, sometimes in only 1 or 2 rooms because they weren't completed. And we would heat our bathwater on hot plates. But she never gave up hope, ever. And she never allowed us to give up hope either. This brutal pragmatism that she had, I mean, I was 4 and she told me, "Mommy is Santa." She was this brutal pragmatism. She taught me so many lessons, but the most important lesson was that every single day she told me, "Melody, you can be anything, anything." And because of those words, I would wake up at the crack of dawn, and because of those words, I would love school more than anything. And because of those words, when I was on a bus going to school, I dreamed the biggest dreams. And it's because of those words that I stand here right now, full of passion, asking you to be brave for the kids who are dreaming those dreams today. You see, I want them to look at a CEO on television and say, "I can be like her," or "He looks like me." And I want them to know that anything is possible, that they can achieve the highest level that they ever imagine, that they will be welcome in any corporate boardroom, or they can lead any company. You see this idea of being the land of the free and the home of the brave? It's woven into the fabric of America. America, when we have a challenge, we take it head on. We don't shrink away from it. We take a stand. We show courage. So right now, what I'm asking you to do, I'm asking you to show courage. I'm asking you to be bold. As business leaders, I'm asking you not to leave anything on the table. As citizens, I'm asking you not to leave any child behind. I'm asking you not to be colorblind, but to be color brave, so that every child knows that their future matters and their dreams are possible. Thank you.
The title speaks for an idea worth spreading. Let's be sure to be color brave to move forward. Lastly, I would like to share my favorite talk. It's from Natalie Warren, and she presented it at TEDx Teen. For me, it is a true testament to how youth can affect today's world.
Hi, guys. My mom is a strong black woman who raised her kids to have the same sense of strength and pride. The spirit was epitomized by a single wall in our small 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago. 2 pictures hung proudly, one larger-than-life photo of my siblings and I, and the other a picture of my mom at 12 years old, staring into the eyes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I was younger, I used to stand on my tippy toes, stare at that picture, close my eyes tightly, and just pretend that it was me, gazing up at the man who revolutionized the civil rights movement, who marched on Washington, and who transformed a generation by his words, "I have a dream." But I did get to meet him. Now, obviously, I didn't meet Dr. King, but I met a man named Dr. Vincent Harding. He worked with Dr. King from day one and even wrote some of his most iconic speeches. You see, this was a really important moment for me as a kid because it was the first time that I realized that it wasn't just Dr. King who led this revolution, but he was surrounded by a movement made up of anonymous extraordinaries. Anonymous extraordinaries are people who work selflessly and vigorously for what they believe in. People who are motivated by conviction and not recognition. It took me a long time to realize the significance of this moment until I was much older. And like I said, I grew up in Chicago. I grew up in a rough, poor neighborhood, but it didn't really matter to me as a kid because I literally have the most incredible family in the world. 2 things that I did struggle with a lot growing up was, one, that my dad has been sick my whole life. He suffers from Parkinson's and pancreatitis, and as a kid, it was so hard for me to watch my hero in so much pain. And my other issue was with me. I guess you could say I had an identity crisis. I had to move 4 times during high school, and my freshman year, I went to an extremely racist high school. These kids were so cruel. They gave us hate letters, wrote terrible things on our lockers, and because I'm biracial, they would tell me, "You can't be both. You have to choose, black or white." And in the end, I just resented being either. And then all of a sudden, my senior year rolls around 2008, and being mixed, being racially ambiguous is this new cool fad. Like, "Oh, Natalie, now it's okay for you to like you. You're pretty now." I was over it. I was really tired of caring about what other people thought, and I just wanted to do whatever I could do to hurry up, go through my classes, whatever school I was going to be at next, and graduate. It wasn't until I was 17 and I saw a film called Invisible Children that something happened. Child soldiers, children, as young as my nephews, being abducted, given AK-47s, and forced to kill. Not just anyone, but oftentimes forced to kill their own parents, their own siblings. A rebel army committing mass murder for no political or religious reason, just because. 25 years. 25 years this conflict has been going on. I'm 20 years old, so that makes this conflict 5 years older than me. One man with one charismatic voice started this whole thing. His name is Joseph Kony. When I saw this film, something happened. Something started kind of stirring inside of me, and I couldn't identify what it was. I didn't know if it was rage, if it was pity, if I felt guilty because this was the first time that I'd heard about a 25-year-long war. I couldn't even give it a name. All I knew is that it kicked me off my ass, and I started asking questions. What do I do? What can one 17-year-old do? You've got to give me something. And they gave me something. The founders and filmmakers at Invisible Children told me that there was this bill, that if we could just get this bill passed, it would do two things. One, it would apprehend Joseph Kony and the top commanders in his rebel army. And two, it would provide funding for the recovery of these regions that have been devastated by 25 years of war. And I was like, done. Let me at it. I swear I will do whatever I can to make this happen. So myself and 99 other idealistic 18 to 20-year-olds hopped on a plane to intern in San Diego with Invisible Children. I was postponing college, we weren't getting paid for this, and you could call it irresponsible or crazy, my parents did. But for us, it would have been insane not to go. We all felt this urgency, and we would do whatever it took to pass this bill. So we were given our first task. We were going to plan an event called the Rescue of Joseph Kony's Child Soldiers, where participants would come in 100 cities worldwide and rally in their city center until a celebrity or a political figure came and used their voice on behalf of these child soldiers. And at that point, each city was rescued. But the catch was, we weren't leaving the cities until we were rescued. I was given Chicago and 9 other cities, and I told my bosses, I was like, if we're going for big name people, why not go for the Queen Bee? Why not go for Oprah Winfrey? They thought I was a little idealistic, but I mean, we were trying to think big. We were doing an impossible thing, so why not try to reach more impossible things? And so we had from January and April to get this done. This is the number of hours that I spent on logistics, from getting permits to rallying participants and finding venues. This is the number of times that I was rejected by celebrities, agents, or politicians' secretaries. That is the number of the amount of money that I spent personally on Red Bull and Diet Coke to stay awake during this movement. You can judge me if you want to. That is my hospital bill from the kidney infection I got from an overconsumption of caffeine due to this event. These were just some of the ridiculous things that we did to try and pull this event off. And so April 21st rolls around, and the event begins. 100 cities around the world. They were beautiful. 6 days later, all the cities were rescued but one. Chicago. So we were waiting in the city. People started coming from all over the world, all over the country to be reinforcements and join their voice with ours. And finally, on May 1st, we wrapped ourselves around Oprah's studio, and we got her attention. This is a clip from a film called Together We Are Free, documenting the rescue event and my attempt to get Oprah.
First, when I drove into the office this morning, there was a giant, when you all came in, was there a group outside? Holding up signs asking if I would talk to them for just 5 minutes, so I was happy to do so. And they are with a group called Invisible Children, and I told this group outside that I'd give them a minute to state their case.
Oprah, thank you so much for having us. Basically, these folks out here have seen the story of 30,000 children abducted by a rebel leader named Joseph Kony. And they're out here in solidarity, and they have been out here for 6 days. This started 100,000 people worldwide. Now it's down to 500, standing strong, so that you can raise the profile of this issue, and we can end the longest running war in Africa and rescue those kids that are child soldiers still in East Africa.
Oprah, I have to say, this girl Natalie here, she's 18 years old. She was an intern for us this year, and she said, my one goal is to get Oprah. She had 2,000 people come out on Saturday, but it rained. She stood here in the rain with 50 people. When they heard she was here, hundreds started coming. People are here from Mexico, Australia. Natalie's 18. Don't think you're too young. You can change the world any day. Start now. Start today.
Was it worth it?
So you would think that this is the moment in my life, the pinnacle that made me an extraordinary. And it was an awesome moment. I mean, I was on top of the world. 10 million people watched the Oprah Winfrey Show. But looking back, that wasn't it. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, it was a great moment. It made for a heck of a profile picture on Facebook for a week. But I had been extraordinary all along. And I wasn't alone. You see, even though my story was featured in this film, I was just one of 100 interns who worked their tails off to make this happen. I'm up in the air, but the guy that I'm sitting on his shoulders, he's my best friend. His name is Johannes Oberman, and Johannes worked with me from day one in Chicago. Just as long hours, just as many sleepless nights as I did. The girl on the right, her name's Bethany Bilesma. Bethany planned New York City and Boston, and they were seriously the most beautiful events that we held. The girl on the left, her name's Colleen. Colleen moved to Mexico, moved for 3 months to plan 5 events there, only to be kicked out the day before the events because of the swine flu. And then there was this family. This family, they didn't get to come to the rescue, they couldn't make it out, but they ordered 100 boxes of pizza for us, delivered them to the corner of Michigan and Randolph where we were all silently protesting. You see, it was people like this doing whatever they could, simultaneously, single-mindedly, without a care to who was watching, that made this happen. It wasn't about us getting on Oprah, because when I got down from their shoulders, the war hadn't ended. It was about that bill. Oprah was just a checkpoint on the way to that bill. That bill was the point. That bill is what we had our eyes set on from day one. That was going to help us end Africa's longest-running war, and that is what brought 100,000 people out to the rescue event from around the world. And it paid off. 10 days after we were on Oprah, the bill was introduced into Congress. A year after that, it got unanimously 267 co-sponsors in Congress. And then 1 week after that, President Obama signed our bill into law. And none of us interns got to be there. We didn't get to be there in this moment. Our founders were there. They're the guys cheesing in the background. But that moment right there is what made all of it worth it. It's what 100,000 anonymous extraordinaries worked for so hard to make that happen. You know, the Oprah moments, they prove that the supposedly impossible can be done. They inspire us, they boost our confidence, but the moment isn't a movement. Even a lot of those moments strung together don't fuel a movement. What fuels a movement are the anonymous extraordinaries behind it. You know, for me, what kept me pushing on through the rescue was the thought of those child soldiers. It became personal. I was able to go to Africa at one point. I met these incredible people. I have friends that have been living in this conflict their entire life, and it was personal to me. But that doesn't have to be what drives you. You know, you may want to be the next Shepard Fairey, or the next J.K. Rowling, or the next whoever, it doesn't matter, but whatever you want, chase after it with everything that you have, not because of the fame or the fortune, but solely because that's what you believe in, because that's what makes your heart sing. That's what your dance is. That's what is going to define our generation. When we start chasing and fighting after the things that we love and that we want to fight for. I cared too much in high school about what people thought about me. That's what's so awesome about this conference is so many of you are so young. Find that thing that inspires you, that you love, and just chase after it. You know, fight for that, because that is what is going to change this world, and that is what defines us. Despite what people think, my Oprah moments, my being on TED, doesn't define me. Because if you were to follow me home to LA, you would see me waiting tables and nannying to pay the bills as I chase after my dream of becoming a filmmaker. In the small, anonymous, monotonous, every single day acts, I have to remind myself to be extraordinary. And believe me, when the doors closed and the cameras are off, it's tough. But if there's one thing that I want to drive home to you, one thing that I can say, not just to you, but to myself, is that is the acts that make us extraordinary, not the Oprah moments. Thank you.
Even if you are young, use your voice and fight for what you believe. Being young does not mean you cannot make an impact. Well, this concludes our TEDxEvansStreet virtual event. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and providing rich insight in the live chat. Thank you to our sponsors once again. We at TEDxEvansStreet hope that you made connections and something that you have heard will spark you to think deeply and spread those thoughts to inspire, cogitate, and keep the conversation going. Please visit our website, TEDxEvansStreet.org, to learn how you can be involved and to also watch past talks. That is TEDxEvansStreet.org. Have a great night.